All right, welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to go into CRUD and REST API designs. All right, so intro to CRUD and REST API designs. What are we trying to accomplish? So we kind of already started it, and you may not have noticed it. And we've been throwing this word around, at least myself, on what CRUD is, or you've probably heard CRUD here and there. And we're going to elaborate a little bit more on that and actually add these capabilities to our application. All right. On top of that, we're going to talk about the REST API a little bit and elaborate more on what those are and how that connects with CRUD. Right. So essentially, CRUD is an acronym, right? And it stands for create, read, update, and delete. Up to this point, you have been using the read portion of your acronym, right? The get method is how you essentially read something in your application. And you might see something in my finger. I cut it, so I do apologize if you see that. But yeah, I didn't want to get derailed. But the get method is the read portion of a CRUD application, right? Create, it's when you create something new in your application, like a new object, right? If we are using our Pokemon project that we created, we might want to create a new Pokemon in our application. Might want to create a new Pokemon trainer, or maybe even create a new move, right? That's where that create method of CRUD comes into play. And that's usually referenced with the command of post, right? We're going to post something, right? Post something new. Think of it like posting a new status on your social media. Right? You create a new status by posting it. Same concept here. We're using the post command to create something new within our application. The read use the .get method because it's getting information in it, and it's displaying it for you where you can read it, right? So get our update method is going to be our put. We're going to put something new on there, right? So a put method will update your already existing objects, your data, whatever you have. And then your delete, that's pretty self-explanatory. That is a delete method. You use .delete to create that delete capability, right? And on top of CRUD, we want to elaborate a little bit more on the REST APIs, as I mentioned before, and what that relationship is between our REST API and CRUD capabilities, right? So if you recall, what does REST stand for? Who can tell me that? Anybody? Ryan?
Is it representational state transfer?
Absolutely. Representational state transfer. And essentially what that is saying is that the way that data is handled with HTTP requests and used with our application, right? Uh, the state transfer of it is the fact that it's stateless, right? So each from a client must contain all the information needed to process it, right? And it uses HTTP methods to handle this, right? It has a uniform interface, so typically they're pretty standard across the board if it's using the architecture of REST. And that's when I say the uniform interface, we're talking about like your URL patterns, right? So having that URL pattern standard, right, of having like forward slash Pokemon, forward slash like a single Pokemon, or doing like moves and then the move itself. And you can get a lot more deeper in REST and then other attributes that might be used to actually really embody a REST architecture type. But this lesson will not dive too deep into it. We're going to talk more with surface level. You might hear acronyms like HOAS, which is like a URL point that will return to you not only everything about that Pokemon, but might also return to you like a field that has links, and these links will be the URL paths that like do these methods like delete or update or post, right? So you might have like a get method to get a Pokemon or all users, and then within there you might find links that show you what methods you can use to query the rest of it, right? But we won't dive too deep into it. We're gonna stick to the surface level, which was the CRUD capabilities. And I want to open up our TL draw and just kind of add some notes here as we talk through it, right? So we have our CRUD acronym where the C stands for create, where we use a post method. We have the R for read, which we have used our get method, our U for update, which is going to require a put method, and our delete, which is pretty straightforward for this one, where it's just delete. All right, a delete method. So we've seen this in action, and let's see how this actually looks like in a URL path, right? So for create, typically what it will look like will be something like this, where we had the prefix of Pokemon within our application, and we saw that to get all the Pokemon, we were able to use just Pokemon. It gave us everything. Well, if we were to create a new Pokemon, we would probably use this same endpoint because usually when we want to grab something, we would add like the ID because it exists, right? Or we added the name, which was like Pikachu, right? And this was for an individual Pokemon, but we aren't trying to do that. We are trying to create a new Pokemon and add it to the rest of our groups of Pokemons that we already have. So when we were to create something, we would usually use that method within the URL point that grabs all our Pokemon. So we can create a new Pokemon and add it to all Pokemon. Does that make sense so far? If it doesn't, let me know and I can explain it further. So the create method will probably go within our prefix of Pokemon where nothing follows because we don't have anything that exists yet. The all Pokemon within the all Pokemon class, we will create a new method, which will be a post method. And within there, we want to create a new Pokemon object and then add it to all our Pokemon. Right? Now for our read, you kind of already saw this. We were able to do a get method for the all Pokemon, but we were also able to do Pokemon / and then we gave it something like int, right? Is your ID, or if we use our project, we actually created a converter where we say int or string, and we said, name of the Pokemon. And this here was able to not only get all the Pokemon, but we were also able to get individual Pokemon. And we can even elaborate this a little bit further if we wanted to expand our endpoints and within this same Pokemon app, maybe added a different URL that said Pokemon. We could have grabbed the individual Pokemon. And we could have also done something like this, where we can grab the like specifically only the move that belong to this individual Pokemon. Now we didn't do that for our URL endpoint. It depends what kind of functionality you want to have for your database. But you could expand on these endpoints and make it more specific. You can grab all the Pokemons. Within this Pokemon, you want to grab an individual Pokemon, and then you want to strictly belong to this one. And we see that, and that's our example of our. And for our update, we would have something like Pokemon, and we would use the URL point that grabs an individual Pokemon, because when we update something, we're trying to update specifically that one Pokemon, right? So we were trying to update Pikachu or Charizard, have that Pokemon at its endpoint, And at this endpoint, that's where we would make that update for this specific object. Right, so a put method will probably be added within this URL end path. And we saw that the view for this was, I believe it was like single Pokemon that I created. That's probably where this would have our put method. And can anyone take a wild guess of how we would delete a Pokemon? What path will we probably use for this?
Is there a delete path? Delete request?
It is a delete request, but when in regards to the context of the URL path, which endpoint will we probably add this delete method at?
URLs.
Yeah, it's gonna be in the URLs, but in the URL patterns, we have it.
Pokemon / delete / int or string name.
Yeah, it will probably be the same one as the update path, right? Because we want to delete a specific Pokemon, so we might want to use this endpoint to grab that single Pokemon, and then we will delete it from there. To see that in our code, we come to our Pokemon app URLs. We had two different endpoints. One was where it would essentially just give us this path right here. And then we have our other URL path, which was something like this, right? If we wanted to add a new Pokemon, we would probably add it within this path. This path here is using what view? The all Pokemon view, right? So the delete method, or I'm sorry, the create method will probably go here, where it will be something like define host, and then we would want to make a new Pokemon within this view here, right? And the way that works is because when we reach this URL path, it gets here to line 9, it finds the URL path we gave into our server, and what's linked to that path? This specific view of all Pokemon. So the REST framework is able to grab the URL path. It knows what view is connected to it. And also within the request, we put the type of request we are making, which is a post request. So it goes into all Pokemon and it looks for the post request if it exists. And that's how it knows what method to use for what specific end path. Right? Back to what we talked about for the update. If we wanted to update a Pokemon, we would use the endpoint that's specifically pointing to a certain Pokemon. So it will be this one, right? This URL path is telling me, hey, within all Pokemon, I want to grab Pikachu. So it takes me here to line 11 on this path. Well, what's linked to this path? This view called single Pokemon. So it's going to grab this view and it's going to look for a put method, which we would end up creating. And within here, we would create a new Pokemon. So where the capabilities of CRUD go is going to be the endpoint that you are using and how you actually want your paths to work. Is everyone still with me? Does anybody have any questions about CRUD, what it does, and how we connect it? Use? Yes.
Yeah, do you think you can go over the visual one more time?
Let's go back to the visual. All right, this is our CRUD capabilities. We have the create, read, update, and delete. Every individual acronym has a specific method that goes to it. Post method for creating, get for reading, put for updating, and the delete for the delete. Where you want to use these methods, it's going to be dependent on the URL. if we are trying to add a new Pokemon to our group of Pokemon, then we would probably want to grab the all Pokemon endpoint that returns to us our query set of all Pokemon. And then within there, we want to add a new object into that query set, right? So that's probably somewhere we will want to create that new Pokemon. If we wanted to read, it would depend whether we want to read all Pokemon or we want to read an individual Pokemon. And that would be dictated on the path. If we're going to read all Pokemon, we'll probably grab this endpoint here and add a get method within the Pokemon endpoint. If we were trying to grab individual Pokemon, we would create a get method on the path that leads to an individual Pokemon. If you wanted to grab the moves that belong to an individual Pokemon, to the path where we grab all Pokemon, the individual Pokemon, and the moves that belong to that Pokemon. This specific endpoint here, we did not create, but we definitely can if we want to expand on it. For updating a specific Pokemon, it makes no sense to add a put method within the all Pokemon view, right? Because we're trying to update a specific Pokemon. So it makes no sense to be grabbing a query set of all our Pokemon just to update one individual Pokemon. So more than likely, if you wanted to update just one Pokemon, we would do it within this path. And then same thing for our deletes, right? If we want to delete a Pokemon, we can just go into the Pokemon grab and just delete it completely from our database. Any further questions, Gary?
No, that answers it all for me. Thank you.
All right. Basic data manipulation, right? Being able to create new stuff, updating it or deleting it. And the REST APIs go beyond it by focusing on two specific things. One is the resource orientation, which is each entity is treated as a resource with its own URL, right? So once again, REST is the architecture style that we use to create our API. That's the whole concept of using HTTP requests, creating URL endpoints to have our CRUD capabilities. And then there's the stateless communication, where each API call is independent and self-contained within its own view, right? So every single specific action we are trying to do is contained within its own specific location, which is in respect to. If I have no further questions, I don't see any hands, and I don't see anything in the chat. Let's actually try to put this in our code to see if we can make some sense of everything I just said. I'm currently working within the same copy of yesterday's assignment. You might see some changes here. I deleted the extra apps that we weren't using, the many-to-one, the one-to-one. If you guys want to know how to do that without getting any errors, you essentially just completely delete the folder. And your project, you're gonna have to come down here and remove it from your installed apps. And then from your database, you would have to drop the table, right? So we no longer see the tables of many-to-one and one-to-one in here. You have to come in here and do drop table and then drop the many-to-one and the one-to-one tables so you don't get an error. I say that because sometimes it can be kind of a headache to try to delete apps that you no longer use. You just kind of have to disconnect everything, right? Now, let's go to our Pokemon view. And we are going to update an existing Pokemon. Let me just make sure I am on path with the curriculum. Oh, one thing before we actually get deeper into it. Here is a nice little table within your curriculum that talks to you about the different types of operations of CRUD, the type of HTTP method that relates to that operation. We see here a rough SQL equivalent of what this CRUD view is actually doing, right? Whenever we create something new, we're essentially inserting into our table. Our get methods are running a select under the hood. When we create a put request, we are essentially updating our database. And when we delete something, we are deleting something from our database. And another good practice when creating CRUD capabilities on your application is to ensure that you send back an HTTP response status, which we will be elaborating a little bit more today whenever we create our methods. All right, let's go ahead and actually get into this. Excuse me. All right, so within our single Pokemon, we currently already have a get method, right? We have our grab our Pokemon, depending on whether it's an ID or a name. We then serialize that Pokemon, and then we return the response of our Pokemon. Let's go ahead, Python manage.py, run server. Just to ensure everything's working right, I am going to copy this. And we are going to have this open so we can kind of see what's happening with our application. API, v1, and then Pokemon. All right, we have the endpoint that gets us all our Pokemon. And right now we are talking about individual Pokemon. So we say Pikachu / and it gives us our individual Pokemon with the fields that we're looking for, as well as types that we added yesterday. So this is our get method. Notice here in my Thunder client, we have the different methods that we can use. We have used get method up to this point. So we have been reading stuff. We've added the read attribute into our application. But now I'm going to want to update an existing Pokemon. Right. Before I do that, I'm going to do some refactoring in this code because we're probably going to add a bunch of other methods. I want to clean this up. We are going to essentially create a helper function to grab our Pokemon. So within our single Pokemon class, at the very top, I'm going to define a new method, and this is going to be called get Pokemon. Because it is a class in itself. And then we are going to take in a variable, and we'll just say it's Pokemon. In this method, I am essentially going to add all this within this method here. And then I'm going to change these values where I am passing in the value of Pokemon, and I'm checking whether it's integer. And let's call this single Pokemon. I pass in a single Pokemon. I'm checking if it's going to be of integer type. If so, I grab the ID. And if it's not integer, that means it's string. And I will use it as for the name, right? And now, instead of having this in our code, we will say single Pokemon is equal to get self.get Pokemon. I'm passing in the helper function I created, and then I'm going to add the variable single Pokemon. That's right here, right? Can somebody remind me where I'm grabbing this from?
Your route on the, so like it being your urls.py, correct? Like, so it'll be your route for where you're searching on your actual server.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just do some refactor on the naming convention so I don't get any weird stuff here. Right? Essentially, when this GET request is made in this view, this single Pokemon value is being grabbed from the arguments that are being passed in my URL path, right? So when I add this URL path on my server, it's going to have a string. It's probably be Pikachu, or it might have an ID of 1 for Pikachu, right? And then it calls the single Pokemon as view class that we created. This class takes in some arguments, and it's grabbing single Pokemon from that URL pattern that we used, right? So if that URL pattern has an ID, or if it has the name of the Pokemon, it grabs that. We use that to pass our helper function. So we don't have to keep repeating this code here. And if we come to our request, I can, something did not work here. It's giving me none. But essentially, single Pokemon type. What did I forget to do here? Who can guess why it's none?
You're not returning.
I don't return anything. Good stuff. I'm not returning single Pokemon. Let's go ahead and go back to our Thunder client, and I can run it. And we see that the helper function is still working. We did not break our views, and we can now just reuse this get Pokemon later in our methods without having to recode this at every single method that we create. I can go ahead and collapse that, and it's no longer in my way. We use that helper function within our get method, and our get method is nice and clean. So we have that help function. Now let's actually create a put request. Well, in our put request, a put is an update method, and we take in a integer or a name to know what Pokemon we want to update, but there has to be a way to be able to grab all the data that we want to add into our new Pokemon. What if the user wants to update every single field within our Pokemon? How can we do that? Do we have to add that to our URL path like we've been doing? No. We can use the body of the request, right? Up to this point, we have been using the arguments that are within our URL path, but what we haven't been able to use so far is the body. And let's open our server on here so we can see how that looks like. When I do API v1 Pokemon and Pikachu, I get my data, and let's open up the inspect tool. I can go to network. Let's run this again. So it runs the get method, and we see here a bunch of stuff happen within the REST framework. Here is the request that was made. I can click it, and I can see everything about this request. This request had the URL path of API v2. It tells me what type of request was made, right? It's a GET request, right? That was defined within my view GET, right? It's making this specific request here. And then the way that we have been accessing the Pokemon we want to grab was through the URL path. We added specifically either the ID or the name. But if we want to update this Pokemon in all its different fields, let's say we want to update the type and the level and the description, it would be kind of awkward to add that all to our URL path, which we can. We've seen that on third-party APIs using stuff like query and then adding certain attributes on endpoints, but there's a different way that we can do that. And that's by using the body of the request. And let's see how that works. Well, we can create a variable here and we'll call it data. And what data is going to grab is going to be the request dot data. And let's return a response so we don't get an error in our view. And let's see what that does. Let's print data. And I don't think it's going to do anything right now. We see nothing's being printed out. And that's because there's nothing in the body. Well, where's the body? Well, if we come to Thunder Client, we see here that we get some different tabs. We have headers, which we kind of saw that in action yesterday, where we created a header for our keys, where you guys were able to authenticate into the different APIs. We have this other tab called body. And notice it is, there's different formats, right? We have JSON, XML, text. What we are going to use is JSON. And within here, we can add actual content to this body. And what I'm going to add is types. And it's going to be electric because we're working with Pikachu right now. And then I can send this. Let's see. Okay, we send it. We have types, Pikachu. And it's not grabbing it. Why is not grabbing it? Oh, why am I not grabbing it, guys? Well, because I'm using the get method. It's using the wrong method here. So let's go to post. And now by changing it to a post, it changes the different method it's going to use. So if I send this, it says method post not allowed. Why are you saying that? Oh, it's supposed to be put. We're updating, not creating. Put. There we go. Okay, we get a response now. We're doing the right one, but we're getting something weird here where it says single Pokemon.put got an expected argument where it was single Pokemon. And that is from where am I grabbing single Pokemon from? Single Pokemon. Why are you giving me this weird functionality? Let's add ID here and do it again. Keyword argument Pokemon. Oh, I see why. In my URL path, I'm passing in this variable single Pokemon, but I'm not doing anything with it in my views. I added ID, right? There is an argument in there, but I'm not using it. So it got an unexpected argument. And if I send it, there we go. I do apologize for that. So it was giving me an issue because the URL path, it has an argument, right, for the put method. It expects me to use that argument, but I wasn't using it. So it's saying, hey, I have an unexpected argument and there's nothing being done with it. I see that in your views you had ID, but that doesn't match the argument that's being passed in. You're trying to grab something that does not exist. What does exist is single Pokemon, right? There we go. So we have single Pokemon, but notice that when I send this request, what's being printed out? The body, right? We created a body here in that request where it says types is electric. And then in my views, I grabbed the data from the request that was made and I was able to print it out and have access to that data. And you've seen this in React, right? When you made your GET requests to different APIs, you've accessed certain parts of that data. You didn't realize it, but that's essentially what we are doing here, where we are grabbing the data that is in that request. right? Now we are just implementing that feature into our own API. So whenever the request runs, I'm able to add certain things to that request. You saw it yesterday with the headers. Today, we are now adding data into it, right? Into the body. Let's see if we can see that happen here on our inspect tool. And this is, there we go. Let's change this to a, am I not able to change it? Why is it not letting me do it? Pikachu. I guess it won't let me do it here. I guess it's not letting me do it here in the server, but we can use Thunder Client to send in data. All right. It's a little difficult to show it here because I don't have somewhere to actually add the data here, right? If I try to reach specifically this
You
point,
can't use that media type content down there at the bottom where it says put.
unfortunately, oh, you are awesome. Let's try that. Let's do here. Let's do our data, and then let's add the media content. Good stuff, buyers. Types. Electric. Let's check the the request made headers. It still get no. This would be this would have been pretty cool if we could. Electric. Oh, let's go. So we have here, it worked. We were able to put in that put request. We got an OK status code. That means it's working. Within one of these headers, we were able to see the information that was sent with that request, which was types of electric. Not exactly how I was trying to put it in here, but it's working. And we can see that we made the put request with the information of data. Good stuff, James. Good catch. Good catch. We didn't have that option there before. If you guys recall, when we only had the get method, it never showed this part right here. If we comment this out and we refresh that, it's no longer here, right? REST framework was smart enough to see that, hey, this view, this endpoint has a view that also has a put method, and it gave us the option to do that within the REST framework tool, which is pretty cool, right? But you see here, we were able to pass in specific data using the put request, right? Grab that data and do something with it. And this data is what we are going to use to actually update our models in our backend, right? Yes, Owen.
This is kind of going back a bit. So we added that second method called get_Pokemon just for the fact that we're utilizing a put method as well, correct?
Yes and no. I did this. Are you talking about this right here?
Yeah, like I know that's the same thing as, yeah, exactly.
This is going back to the principle of dry. Do not repeat yourself. I'm about to start creating multiple different methods here. You know, we have the get request, we're gonna do a put, we're gonna do delete, we're gonna do post request. Instead of constantly adding that method where I was checking if it was ID or name, all I did was create a method that can do that for me and then just reuse that method instead of coding 4 different lines every single time I create a new method. Does that make sense?
Yeah, can you drop it down just to see what I can?
Of course. Right,
Okay.
this is what we had yesterday.
So you need that at the top, so single Pokemon then transfers over to whether it's a ID or it's a ID or a name.
Correct. Right, when we put in a get request or a put or post, we're passing in an argument within the URL path. We use that argument, which could be an ID or it could be a string name, We give that into our get Pokemon method, and then it uses that argument to actually query our database to grab a Pokemon depending on what arguments were passed into our URL path. Make sense?
Yeah. And then this is kind of out of scope, but what did you have to import to utilize the get object or 404 method in?
This is coming from Django shortcuts.
Thank
You use add get object or 404, and instead of doing like Pokemon.objects.get and we try to query something, we have this nice little shortcut we can use where it'll immediately just give us a 404 error if it doesn't find that Pokemon.
Thank you.
No problem. So we now have a way to access data within our request. And there's something that we want to do to this data that's good practice, and we can speak of it a little bit more. But essentially, I do not want to be able to just grab the raw data. What should be done here is using a method called copy, right? What that's going to allow me to do is create a copy of the data from the request without me directly accessing that data, right? And there's a couple reasons for it. Essentially, the request.data, right, is usually a read-only object, right? So meaning you can't guarantee the integrity of the original data if you modify it directly. And typically for REST framework, you would get an error saying query dict instance is immutable. So if for whatever reason we try to update that data, we might get some weird functionality, some errors. It might not even let you. Second, it will have some weird side effects, right? So if you plan to use the data later in your code, the other parts of your code might expect the original data to remain unchanged. So it's not good practice to just grab the raw data and use that as you see fit. So we want to make a copy of it, right? And lastly, the data, modifying the data directly could corrupt the information, right? So it will make your debugging much more difficult. So it is not good practice to just from the request, you want to make a copy of that. So on line 35, we do request.data.copy, and that lets us grab it without actually manipulating the real data. Does anybody have any questions about the .copy method? All right, we're going a little bit slow, so I'm gonna try to speed it up a bit. So we have that. Now let's actually put it to some use. We are going to grab a Pokemon that we want to update. So we're going to say Pokemon is equal to, and we're going to use that get method that we created, which is called get Pokemon. And we're going to pass in the value that's within our URL path, which is single Pokemon. All right, we are using this get method here to grab it. All right, because the URL path, as it stands here, it's saying, hey, I want to go to this path here, grab Pikachu, and I'm going to update this Pikachu. Well, we need to grab that object to actually update it. So within this put method, I need to grab it. Right? Now, to actually update our Pokemon, there's a couple ways of doing it. You might be inclined to try to hard code it, where you can say if captured, right, in data and type of data captured is equal to a Boolean, then we can use like Pokemon dot change caught status, the method that this model has. And we can change it by passing in the new capture status. You might be inclined to do something like this, where you'll check every individual field to see if it matches, and if so, you change it. But that's not good practice, right? Because there can be multiple things in here. We can have like, let's say we are trying to put in a put request into Pikachu. We want to change the types. We might want to change the captured status to false. Right, we might want to change description to a nice yellow rat with electricity. Right, whatever you want to change it here, you might pass in different types of changes that you want to make to Pikachu, and you might feel inclined to check every single thing. Where it's like, if types in data, then Pokemon dot, I don't have a method like I do for change caught status. Right, where am I getting this from, Roger? This is coming from my Pokemon model, right? We created a method here to change the caught status to what the opposite of it. So right now it's set to false and it's a Boolean. By using the caught status, I'm able to change it to the opposite of what's currently set. Right? Here I'm checking if captured is within the data that's coming from the request. And then I'm checking if the type of that field is actually a Boolean. And if so, I change the status to whatever is being set as a value within the data of captured. Right? We might want to do that for types as well. We can say Pokemon.types is equal to data.get. This will have to be parentheses. Data.get types. Right? We might want to do something like this where you feel inclined that you have to hard code every single thing. If we did this way, we would have to do like if checks for every single possible data that might be not too practical, right? It's an easier way of doing this.
Can you repeat that, Roger? You cut out.
I'm sorry. How far?
Just that last sentence.
Yeah, you might want to, hard code every single line here where you check every single field that they could possibly send within the body and then change it. But that's not very practical because it's a lot of coding. Why would we want to do that when there is better methods? And there is a better method, right? Instead of checking every single field that might be coming within that request body, we could do something like this, where we can use our Pokemon serializer, right? We can say updated Pokemon is equal to our Pokemon serializer. And if you guys recall, we were able to add a variable called data and assign it some raw data, right? Where it's like, name is like Pikachu, and it's smart enough to be able to get raw data and add it to our Pokemon, right? So within here, we can say, hey, I want to update Pokemon. The data I'm going to be giving it is, let's change the name of this so we can understand it. Body data. The data is equal to body data. And partial is equal to true. And what does that mean? That means that sometimes you might not get all the fields that belong to Pokemon. You might only get a single field that we're trying to update. Let's take a look at our serializer real quick to remind ourselves what this is doing. Our serializer is able to format your Pokemon by fields. We see here that this is everything that it'll return. And therefore, we can also update these fields here by passing in that data that we just did. But we encounter an issue here, right? Where we might receive data that we're trying to update, but our serializer isn't tracking all that extra fields that we're trying to update. So we're gonna have to change this to something like all. So we have the ability to update every single method that's within my Pokemon serializer. And then we add this other argument called partial equals true, because not all the times are we going to give it a dictionary that changes every single field. Maybe sometimes I'm only going to change the type. Next time, I might just want to change the level. Sometimes I might want to change every individual field. My poker needs to know whether I'm getting a data set of all the fields or if I'm going to receive partial information. Right? And let's go ahead and print updated data or updated Pokemon. Let's see what this is doing right now. I am receiving an error. Why do you guys think so? I can already probably guess why. Anybody want to take a wild guess? Captured is false. Let's see if this works. I'm getting an issue here because of the validators. Let's print out body data.
I'm sorry, Roger. Where is your error at? What error are you looking at?
I am looking at my terminal. Are you guys not seeing it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, so here is my data. I am passing description. Look, I'm looking at my Pokemon. Everything's good so far. Is it because of false? It should be a string.
I don't see no error in your. Well, now I do. I see the red now. The
Yeah, my
bad.
serializer is having issues here where it doesn't understand. It's saying it's a bad request.
You forgot another quote around false.
Is it
Partially
something to do with your max length validator? Looks like saying something about your validator is your max length validator.
Yeah. What's my max? It's 150. It should be good. Capture is false. Let's keep it simple. To bad request. All right, I got my data, I got my Pokemon. Updated Pokemon. Response true. It's this serializer. It's not liking what I'm doing.
For JSON, can you leave that extra comma in there?
In my request, it shouldn't be an issue. Let's do some quick debugging. So I have my Pokemon here. I got my data. You have the Pokemon serializer. We're passing the Pokemon we're trying to update.
It didn't fix it once you sent that last request?
Negative.
Where in your terminal are you seeing that you're getting an error on the last one?
Here, so it's saying, so I hear put, this is in red, I'm getting a 400. Let's check what the 400 is.
Yeah, but you updated it without that comma and it didn't give you that 400.
Bad request. The reason for a 400 request is typically due to malformed request syntax. So there's an issue with the request itself.
Yeah, but I'm saying at the bottom, you gotta put 200 right there.
Where?
At the very
November
bottom.
2024, the very last line, put at the end, it says 200 and then 4. You see the last line of your terminal?
Yeah, 200. So put request 204. Yeah, it's still not passing this part here, the serializer.
Are you saying that because it's not printing out your new object?
Yeah, we shouldn't be receiving this. Let's see here. What is going on here? Maybe because it's not valid. Let's go ahead and do this. We got the updated Pokemon. I'm gonna say if updated Pokemon dot is valid, then let's do updated Pokemon dot save. And then we should return a response here. I think for me, because we're not returning a response. Return response updated Pokemon dot data. And if not, we're going to return response updated Pokemon dot errors. And we'll do a status of HTTP 400 battle request. I need status up here. We do from REST framework dot status imports HTTP 400 battle request.
And you need that. You should need an else because otherwise it's gonna respawn with that no matter what, correct?
Yeah, correct. Let's try this. Okay. I think it was causing an error because of the serializer not being saved. We were running the edge valid, but we weren't saving it and didn't know what to do with it, I would assume. Which is why actually I think what printing out was but let's just review real quick what happened here. So I essentially grabbed the data from the request, right? Body data is equal to request.data.copy. We made the copy of it. We didn't want to grab the direct raw data. I grabbed the Pokemon that I plan to update. And what I do here is I get a Pokemon serializer. I pass in the Pokemon object that I want to update, right? This is the original actual object that we queried from our database, right? We queried it here and we're passing it in. I'm passing in the new data that should be taking part. And then I'm telling it partial equals true to let the serializer know that, hey, not everything within the model fields is going to be present within my body data. So just be aware of that, right? So it takes in that data, it to our object, or essentially updates it, and then we run, is this valid? Does it pass all my restrictions, all my validators? And if so, I want you to save it into my database and then return to me the updated Pokemon data. But if it doesn't pass, return to me the errors that's happening within my serializer and also give me a status of 400 battle requests. So when I have this here, I run it and we don't get any errors. I see here the types is electric. We can do types fire. We see types is fire. Let's go back to electric. And let's change the description. I'm going to say a yellow rat with electricity. And we see that description gets changed. Right. Do I have any questions on the put request? I see Owen.
I was just going to ask if you could throw a print statement like you originally had, but I think the TC request kind of visualized it for me.
Okay. Yeah, let's still do that. Let's print out.
Like under before you return it, print updated Pokemon after your save. Yeah, right there.
Yeah, that's what was happening. It wasn't that it failed. It was printing out a serial version of the Pokemon. If you guys remember the Python shell or the Django shell that we were using, whenever we serialized the Pokemon, I tried to print it out and it would give me all the fields, right? And then I had to do that serialized Pokemon.data to finally show data in there. That's what was happening. I think Juan, you were right on the mark. The request was good. It was making the changes, but this was throwing me off because I've never seen it in my terminal. I've seen it in my shell. Thank you, Juan, for that. That's all that was happening there. The request was perfectly fine. We're good to go. Time is 10:03. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break and we can come back and continue with the class. Welcome back, everybody. I see Owen. We do have a question. How can I help?
Yeah, you on line 46, you included status equals the 400 bad request. How did you import that again?
Yeah, so I did go really quick there because I was trying to debug my code. I should have taken it a little bit slower. I'll get to it right now. Let me just go ahead and break this line by line. And when I get to that, we can talk about it, right? So we mentioned, how do we grab data to update our Pokemon, right? We've been updating our Pokemon using the arguments that are passed within our URL pattern. And that gave us some functionality, but there's going to be events where we want to update multiple things, right? And we see that here where we want to update multiple fields within our object or our model. And, you know, it's too much to add within our URL path, which we could set up our URL paths to be able to take query parameters and whatnot. This is one way of doing it where we can pass it within the body of our request, right? We make a copy of that data so we don't manipulate the original request data. We were able to query our database to grab the Pokemon that we are trying to update. How do I know which Pokemon I want to update? Well, that's coming from the URL path, right? We use Pokemon/Pikachu, letting us know that, hey, at the Pikachu endpoint, I want to put in a put request, and that's the Pokemon I want to update. So to update it, we still have to grab that object so we can actually do some manipulation. And then we came down here to line 41, where I am leveraging the Pokemon serializer to do all the heavy lifting. So I don't have to write line by line every single field that I want to update. My Pokemon serializer already does a lot of that work for me. If we reference our serializers here, it's tracking the fields that we have and what it should display to us. So using our Pokemon serializer, we are able to pass in an object. And what our Pokemon serializer does, it serializes our Pokemon that we passed in here, right, to a dictionary format, right? And then it grabs our data that we created or we grabbed from our request body, and then it compares them. Hey, here's my original data. I have all these fields. And then I have this new data that I'm going to use to update the original fields. The partial argument that was added right afterwards is to let our serializer know that, hey, this data might not be complete. There might be some fields that are missing compared to our original data. So be aware of that. And then it saves our updated Pokemon serialized within this variable, right? And how do we make sure that our updated Pokemon meets the constraints that we set within our validators? Well, we know that we can use the isValid method that we were using within our Django shell. So we call isValid. And then if we don't get a validation error, then it should allow us to move forward and grab line 43 where we say .save, which then saves it to our database. And then we just return that data. Let's try and break this. Let's add types instead of what we originally saw here. And if we send this, we're gonna get an error. Oh, my bad. No, wrong error. Let's change this to fire. I don't know why it keeps deleting everything afterwards. Okay, I'm surprised we did not get an error. That's weird. But notice that it did not update the electric, right? It doesn't recognize types, right? That's not one of the fields. The Pokemon serializer is smart enough that it's able to use the fields that it has within its serializer. It compares the data that's coming in, and it doesn't know what types is, so it's not going to update it. Right? Let's go ahead and remove this, and let's add something that definitely won't fit in here, which I believe is like fire type. If we add a space, I don't think our validator should take that. Once again, it needs the comma. And here we go. We see invalid type, and it tells us fire type. Please choose from rock, normal, bug, ghost, fire, water, electric, and psychic. And that's going back to the validator that we set for our validate Pokemon type, where we are choosing between this list. Right? So it's able to take in data. It finds the values that we are going to use to update our fields, but notice that it doesn't save them if it doesn't pass the is valid check, right? And it gives us the error. And that's why it's, it's pretty useful to use our Pokemon serializer. Afterwards, once it's serialized, we return it. But in the event that we don't do that, we do response. And within the response, we print out the errors that is coming back from our serializer and validators, right? Whenever something fails a validation, it has a error in there, which you guys have seen that already, the validation error. So I'm able to print that out, which is what you saw here in real time. We print it out, or we return this error. And then we also return a status of HTTP 400 battle requests. And to answer Owen's question, where did I get this? Well, to import our statuses, you're going to go to the top and you're going to say from REST framework.status. I want to import HTTP 400 battle requests, and then I can go ahead and just import the other ones I'm going to be using, which is going to be 200 for an OK. I'm going to use created. And I believe there is one more, which is a no content one. Is 201, I think. No, 204, no content. And then we will see these in action once we get to their respective method. So we updated a Pokemon successfully. Do I have any questions on the put method, guys?
So I'm assuming for this one, you would add one of those HTTP, what was it, 204 for updated or whatever to the first return response?
That's a great question, Juan. I don't have to. By default, when the put request is successful, it's going to return to me a 200 response, and we kind of already saw that. Let's go ahead and change this back to what it was. Let's put it to electric because it is Pikachu. And when I send this request, you see here the status is 200 OK. By default, when a successful response for put is made, it will already send the 201. That's why I didn't add it. Thank you for that question, Juan. All right. So we have everything that we're looking for here. Obviously, the format of my serializer isn't exactly how I would like it. I would like the moves to be at the very bottom. I can come back here and reformat my serializer to have it how I want to, but that's not the point of the class. Let's actually talk about that moves. The moves, what if I want to update moves? Well, if I come down here and I say moves and try to add a specific move in here, let's see what moves I have. I don't recall all the moves. Let's go here. We have an endpoint for it, so we can say moves. I have Scratch, Thundershock, Flamethrower, and Rock Smash, right? Right now, he has Scratch and Thundershock. Let's give Pikachu Rock Smash. If I say Rock Smash, let's see if that works. And we see here that move doesn't get updated. And that's because it's a many-to-many relationship, right? It doesn't know how to handle it because these are essentially objects, right? If you recall the relations that Pokemon and moves has, it has a many-to-many relationship where within our move app, if we go to models, we see here Pokemon has a many-to-many relationship with move because of this key here, right? This field, it's saying that Pokemon will have a related name of moves, and that's how we're accessing the moves in our serializer. We can't just add the string Rock Smash and expect it to know that this should be an object, right? It's not that smart. So we have to do a little change to our put request. Within our views, how can we handle that? Well, we are going to create another helper function, so I don't add it here. After the get Pokemon, I'm going to create define, and I'm going to say update moves. And this is going to be self. It's going to take in a Pokemon object. And then we're going to take in something like list of move IDs. Right? And what this helper function is going to allow me to do is use the data that's coming from the request. Is going to check what I'm trying to add, whether it's Rock Smash, right? Whether it's Flamethrower, and then it's going to query my database to grab the move object, and then it's going to add it to my Pokemon. What is the ID for Rock Smash? It is 4. So within here, we can say for move ID in list of move IDs. You're probably asking, so Roger, where am I going to be grabbing this from? But when I use this method, what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to say list of move IDs is equal to request.data.get, and I'm going to grab the field list of moves that's going to be added to my body. So instead of moves here, I can put something like list of moves. And then here I would add the ID, let's say 4 for Rock Smash. So when that request comes in, I grab the data for list of moves, right? It should be some kind of a list. So let's go ahead and reformat that. This should be a list. And then here we'll add 4. All right, so we should be able to grab the list of IDs, and that's what we're going to pass in within our helper function here. Yes, one.
Are you doing it by IDs for a specific reason, or can you also do it for names if you wanted to, or something like that?
Yes, you can. You can do it by names. I'm trying so we don't lose too much time today, right? So I grab a list, and then I'm going to iterate through those lists. I'm going to say for move ID and list of move IDs, if get object or for 4, I pass in the model, which should be move. Notice that I don't have access to it, so I'm going to have to import that model. So I'm going to say from move app.models import move. And then, and here I can say, I want to grab the move where ID is equal to move ID. So if I have the ID, then what I should do is call the Pokemon object that I have dot moves dot add. Why do I do dot moves dot add, guys?
To maintain the current list that you have in there of moves.
Yeah, right. So move and Pokemon, they have that many to many relationship. How do I access the moves from my Pokemon object? Moves isn't in here. We don't see it. But in the move model, we have that many to many connection. And then we also have here a variable called related name, which is moves. So whenever the connection is made between move and Pokemon, I can access the moves that belong to that Pokemon object by calling that related name. And now, why do I use .add? Well, because it's a many-to-many relationship. Therefore, the moves field is a set, right? It is a query set, right, of different objects. I don't know if this is starting to, retrace your memory now from that class. How do we add that connection to our query set? By using the .add method. And then we add it with the move of ID. Finally, we can say Pokemon.save. And we can now use that method within our put. Right? So we can come down here where we say if it's valid. So if our Pokemon is valid, I'm going to say if request.data list of moves. This is going to check if this field even exists within my request data, the body. Does this exist in here? And if so, I want to run the following. Where I'm going to do update. What did I call it? Update moves. Yep, update moves. And I believe I have to do self here. Self.update moves. What does this helper function take? It takes in the object that we're trying to update, which is essentially updated Pokemon. And then the next item it takes is a list of move IDs. So we say data. We just pass in a list of move IDs because that's what we declared here. Right, we already grabbed the list of IDs. And now let's see how that works. Right now we have Scratch and Thundershock. And if we send this, it hates me. Okay, Pokemon serializer object has no attribute moves. Let's go back to our views. If it's valid, then I want to grab the list of moves. Oh, my bad. I'm not adding the new Pokemon. I'm adding this one. There we go. There we go. And we see that ID is 1, is Pikachu, and the moves got updated. It now has Rock Smash. It now has a many-to-many relationship with the Rock Smash object. Do I have any questions on how this works?
Can you go over what you just changed to make it work?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Well, this serialized Pokemon, I initially added it in here, right? But it says that it doesn't have the moves in there. Well, because I'm not trying to update the new Pokemon, I'm going to update the old one first. And there's probably a better way of doing this. Right, so it updates the other one first. That one does have my moves object. This is not utilizing the moves. So when I try to add that in there, it was giving me issues. So I update the original. And then the only thing that this is updating is the rest of the fields that does not include moves. Does that make sense, James?
Somewhat. Just seems like it seems out of order, but I just could just be a little confused.
Okay, yeah, so Pokemon. Let's do Pokemon. This has a bunch of different fields, right? It has ID, it has name, it has moves. What else does it have? Level, date encountered, so on and so forth. Right, so level, date encountered, so on and so forth. Right, the Pokemon serializer created an updated Pokemon. And the only thing this updated Pokemon is concerned with is what's in the body. So types, description, and list of moves. Types, descriptions, and list of moves. When I initially added updated Pokemon in here, I tried to add moves, but the serializer wasn't concerning itself with moves, right? It was concerning itself with types, description, and list of moves. So what I did here is I changed this up. I saved the original Pokemon one, so this can change the moves. But updated Pokemon, all it was changing was types, description, and list of moves. So this will update the moves, and this only has to concern itself with the changes I'm trying to make. Both of these update the original Pokemon, right? But this one is only worried with everything else except the moves many-to-many relationship. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. All right. We are going to leave testing at the very end, just so I can make sure I can get through everything. Yes, James?
Sorry, I was just wondering if you could quickly walk through the get object or 404, especially what it's doing in update moves when you put it in an if statement like that.
Yeah. So get object or 404, it does two things, right? One will be it's gonna grab your object, or two, it's gonna return to you an error if it doesn't find that object, right? So when I say if get object 404, get object is going to have two things. It's gonna have the object itself, or it's gonna have nothing and it's gonna give me an error, right? So if I say if get object or 404, this is checking, hey, is there actually something assigned to this now? Was I able to get back an object and save it into this? If it gives me a 404, there's no object in here. That means this isn't an actual instance of my object. Does that make sense? So this is checking, hey,
Yeah.
is this actually an object or not?
Got it. But because it's in the if statement, if it's get object or 404, will it return true and execute the if block if it returns an object or a 404, or will it, if it gets a 404, will it turn into false and then it won't execute the
Yes.
rest of it?
What you
Okay.
just what you said at the end, if it returns a 404, it doesn't have an object. Therefore, the if get object or 404 is going to return false, right?
Great.
And therefore it won't run lines 33 or 34. But if it does
Got
find
it.
that object, that means, hey, this is true, then I can go ahead and add it and save it. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. So the next part of the curriculum is doing the testing, but I want to make sure I can get through everything before we start adding some tests, just to ensure that I don't waste time. So let me go ahead and move ahead from that. Okay, I think we are good. I'm just checking the curriculum. All right, I think the next thing we're going to move into is going to be creating something. All right, so we talked about updating a Pokemon, right? We use this URL path. It leveraged the single Pokemon class as a view. So whenever we ran this path here, it knew to use this view to do all its functionality. This is essentially a request. When it opens up the view, it's checking what type of request was made. Was it a GET request or a PUT request? Because it was a PUT request, it ran this over everything else. And we were able to successfully update our Pokemon. But what if we want to create a new Pokemon? Which path are we going to use?
Post.
That is the method we will use. Yes, we will create a post request to create this Pokemon. But at what endpoint do I want to use? Do I want to use this endpoint
All
right here?
Pokemon.
All Pokemon, right? We don't have a specific Pokemon here, so there's no reason to use this endpoint because this is asking for us to give it an ID or a name. We want to create something new, and that needs to be added to our all Pokemon. So that's going to tell me here that I should probably use the all Pokemon class to create that post request. So return back to my views, and I'm going to go up to my all Pokemon view. We have the get method that retrieves all our Pokemon. And why are you yelling at me?
You gotta change the put to get.
James, you're awesome. I can't live without you. Thank you. Get request. We now have our list of all our Pokemons here. We have Pikachu, Charizard, and Squirtle. I want to make something new. Well, to make something new, we're also going to leverage the request body, right? We should be able to do within this request body to add the fields that our models takes. It should be able to take a name. I'm going to want to create, let's say, Cyndaquil, one of the OGs. And it should have a level of 5. Let's make it 10. And then the description will be a ferret with a spicy attitude. I think it's a ferret. All right. So this is what's going to be within my request. All right. In the body, let's go ahead and return back to our views. And we are going to make a post request. What do you think has to happen in this post request? Who can kind of talk me through the global scheme of this? It's not your question. It's actually fairly similar to a put request. There's some core concepts that need to happen, right? What did we do for our put request? Well, we had to get the Pokemon we wanted to create. We also had to get the data, right? We use our serializer to update it, and we had to validate and save it, right? So using those concepts that we just discussed, what's one thing that we probably have to do within our post request?
Probably get all of your Pokemon.
Not necessarily. We don't have to add our Pokemon. How do we create a new instance of something? What do we do here? What do we do when we create something new or update something?
So access your model.
Put it in a variable. So we use all Pokemon serializer and put it in a variable.
I see where you guys are going. These are good tries. I understand the thought process behind it. But not necessarily, right? We will need our Pokemon serializer. We probably want to create a new Pokemon, right? So I'll run with the serializer part. We'll probably want to use our Pokemon serializer to create something new. We've seen that we can add data is equal to and then pass in raw data like a dictionary where we do like Cyndaquil, right? Comma, level, 10, description, so on and so forth, right? It can take in a raw dictionary like this. It takes in the information. We can run if it's valid and then save it, right? But we want this to be dynamic. We don't want to just be able to just, have to hard code this. Yes, Owen.
Could you use the chords? Like
The
the chord statement inside your Pokemon serializer then?
the quartz. I'm sorry. I don't. Sorry.
Like the star chords?
Oh yeah. I mean, we can. We definitely can. And what are we trying to add in here?
Trying to add a new Pokemon, so
What should it take? What will those arguments be?
whatever the arguments are in your serializer or in your model.
Yeah, it should match the model. I see you trying. Good attempt, right? But where are we going to get that data from? Well, as we just talked about,
The request data.
the request, exactly. Request dot data dot copy, right? Because we don't want to manipulate the original body. We're going to want to grab the data that's coming from this request so we can make this new Pokemon, right? And then what we do is literally just say data is equal to data. We can say, let's change this up so we know what this is. We can say body data, right? We'll pass in the data within our Pokemon serializer, right? And then how do we know if this model or the data that we're passing into our serializer matches what the model requires? What command do we have for that?
Is valid.
Is valid, right? So we're gonna grab that new Pokemon that we created, and we have to make sure that it is valid before we save it into our database, right? And then at some point, if it is valid, we should run new Pokemon dot save, right? So with this in mind, we should probably do something like an if statement. So if the new Pokemon is valid, then I want to save my new Pokemon. Afterwards, I want to return a response. And the response is going to be the new Pokemon dot data, right? Because it's serialized now. We can return the data. And then we can return a status of HTTP 200 OK. Which I believe if we don't add it, it should be by default. We can see that to both. But in the event that it's not valid, we should return a response where the new Pokemon validator should return to me errors. And then I want to get a status of HTTP 400 bad request. And I got a typo here. And let's see that in action. Let's change this to a post request. We are within all the Pokemon endpoints. We have the body of what we want to use to create this new Pokemon. And we can press send. And we now see here that we got a status of 200 OK. And we have Cyndaquil at level 10 with the defaults of every other field that we have, like date encountered, captured, description, captured, and types, right? Yes, James.
Is this the context where we would want to use the HTTP 201 created, or is that still not?
That is
Not yet.
perfect. Thank you for catching on to that. Yes, that is a good type to do something like status is equal to HTTP 201 created. Let's go ahead and add something new. Let's add total dial. He is of level 13. He's not going to take a description. We can send this. Invalid character. Oh, my bad. I don't know why whenever I edit this, it deletes everything to the right of it. I do apologize. Send this, and we get total dial created with a status of 201 created. Let's go to our database. We can what tables do we have? I have Pokemon at Pokemon. So let's select all from Pokemon at Pokemon. And we see here that Cyndaquil and Totodile were added to our database. Right? So if I was doing this from my client, right, from my React project, and I wanted to make a new Pokemons, right, and add it to someone's Pokemon team or whatever, I can put in a request, you know, and ping my backend API. I would pass in, you know, a body within the request. So my backend create that object and save it to my database. Do we understand how this works, guys? Do I have any questions in
Roger, can I see your
regards?
code real quick?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and add some. I like having these because then I get confused. All right, this is my all Pokemon. Let's recap what I did. I created a new method called post. I grabbed the data that was in my request, right? Notice that I can't create a Pokemon by having ID because, you know, there's no such ID for this Pokemon that's not created. So we can't do that. We're not going to use the name because there's other fields that we have to take into consideration that our model requires to create this object. So we use the body. We grab the data from the body. We pass in that data into our Pokemon serializer. It dissects that data and compares it to all the fields that are within my Pokemon serializer. What is those fields? Well, I have it here set to all. So it's going to, you know, set all of those. And then afterwards, I check if it's valid, right? To see if the data that was added within this Pokemon object meets the constraints of my validators. And if it passes, I should save it into my database and finally return to my user the data as well as a status of.
Are you talking? Because we can't hear you.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
The last thing I heard was return the status of.
Oh, I'm sorry. My mic is horrible. I do apologize. Yeah, and then we return the status of 2-1 created, right? In the event that the is valid fails, it will check the errors that's coming from that validation check, and it prints it out for me, and it gets the status of 400 bad requests. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's break this. Let's go ahead and do Muck, I think was the name of this Pokemon, right? It shouldn't not work because the fields don't meet the criteria of my validators. Once again, it wants me to add this because it deleted it, and we see improper name format. So that is valid, ran it. It saw that the data that I added within my body does not meet the criteria of my validators. Therefore, it returned to me the errors from the validator. That's right here. New Pokemon dot errors as well as the status of 400 bad requests. Do I have any questions about how to create a new Pokemon?
Yeah. So for your line number 19, request.data.copy, is that pulling that from the model or the serializer, or where is it pulling that from?
This is grabbing it from the request.
Okay.
Right.
Can
Just like
could you add a print statement below that so I can just visualize it and then run one of them?
yeah, so what's happening here, right? Whenever I run this path in my server, what's actually happening is something like this, where it's saying, like, imagine you're doing this from your client, axios.get, and it's taking in a URL path. Right, I'm just gonna do something down and dirty. Within here, there is something like a body, and this body has a dictionary. right? Within this dictionary, we have like the name, which is total dial, right? Uh-oh, total dial. And this is kind of what it looks like in your front end. This is the request that you guys have been making, something very similar to this, right? Where you have the actuals.get, you have the path that you're trying to ping, and then you would add some kind of header, which will be like your body, where you can add your data into it. And then what happens is when it pings your server, it goes through the URL path. If you recall, it comes here into your Pokemon project URLs. It looks for the Pokemon path. This sends it to our Pokemon app.urls. It gets here and it says, okay, so I'm within the path that the GET request made. I'm going to use the all Pokemon one because that's what's being assigned to this path. It goes into our views, and this method has access to the request, right? That request that was made, right? That's the actual request. So request.data grabs the information from the body of the axial request. Right, that's how this comes here. Does that make sense to you, Owen?
Yeah, that clears things up.
Yeah, no problem. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. Once again, I'm leaving the test to the very end before we're done with class. I don't want to not cover the important parts. Let's go back actually to this. Let's go back to our put. We're gonna make an update. I want to change the type of total dial. I think it's type, I believe, or is it types? To fire. Let's grab total dial first. Make sure he exists. Total dial. Yeah, he's in here. All right, so I put in the GET request. I grab total dial. I want to change his types to normal. So types from normal to fire. This is a put request. And why are you yelling at me? Name path is not defined. Let's go. List of moves. If request updated list of moves. All right, I am getting an issue with my put request. Request.data. Let's go with body data. Still not like you. Did I change anything to my views before that? I will come back to this. Let's go ahead and comment this out for now. We will debug this with our test. All right, it made the change. I'm not quite sure what's going on with the moose part. I'll figure it out when we go on our break, and then we can talk about it. But notice that I had already created that total dial earlier. Then I can come back here, put in a different type of request. I changed its types, right? And it changed my Pokemon for me. We can do level 13. Let's make it 15. And it changed to 15. I'm not quite sure what's going on here, why it's giving me an issue here if it doesn't exist. It shouldn't give me an issue because it says if body data list moves, but it doesn't exist. But I'll figure out during the break. Time is 10:59. let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. We can come back at 11:09, and then we'll talk about the delete and then go into our tests. All right, welcome back, everybody. So before we went on break, I had a question about how this will look like on Axios. Right, so here is you have like a small sample code where in your front end you would probably create something like this where you have const new Pokemon, right? You object, right, where you give it the data that you are trying to use for your backend, right? Name, Charmander, types, fire, and then you give the description, whatever field you want to use to create your Pokemon, right? And then you would come down here, you would do Axios dot post, right? Because you're trying to create that new Pokemon. You give it the endpoint to your backend, to the URL path where that all Pokemon view that you created should be located at. And then you pass in that object, that JSON object, or the dictionary that your backend will use. And that's what we're grabbing here, right? That request.data, it takes this request because this is the request, right? It uses the URL path to know where to go to handle this request. It knows to go to Pokemon. That's within our URL path. Oh, I was already here. It knows to here. When it gets here, it sees that, hey, this path is connected to this view called all Pokemon. And then it goes in here. And then on the all Pokemon, it sees the request. Okay, this request was a post, right? That's what was in my request. So I'm going to use this post method. And then this post method is grabbing that request.data to access the contents that was sent in that little request package, right? It takes that data, runs it through our serializer. Our serializer knows what fields belong to our Pokemon object. So it uses that against the data that we're passing in, and it tries to create that object for you. And then it runs is valid to run it against the constraints, right? If it passes the validator checks, then we save it, and we handle what type of response to get back to our clients. Does this explain the process from start to finish of how this looks like? Awesome. We saw that for our put method as well, something very similar, where we once again grab that request, the data that belongs to the request, and we use that, right? We need to grab what Pokemon we're trying to update. Well, where is that Pokemon located at? Well, we can also grab the arguments that are coming from the request. We've been doing that this week, right here. This argument that's passed within the put request is grabbing the argument that's in our URL path, right? Whether it's an ID or a name. It grabs the actual object using that argument that was passed within our URL path to query our database. We have a function here where I try to use list of move IDs. If you guys aren't aware of how the .get method works for dictionaries, is the reason why we use it is because it returns either the object that it grabs, or by default, it'll return none. Right, and I had to do that here to refactor my code. Right, so here it tries to grab the list of moves field within my request. Right, you saw earlier that was getting an error. It was saying like list of moves is not in here. It wasn't being handled correctly. So instead, I did this where I get body data.get the list of moves. This will essentially end up returning none if the field does not exist. If you want to give it a default return, you can do something like return 0. You can give it a second argument, string none. It'll return whatever you give it as a second argument. But I don't want that. I just want the default version of none. We take our Pokemon serializer. We grab our original Pokemon within the serializer. The serializer grabs the data, and it uses these two to compare what needs to be updated. The partial argument lets it know that, hey, this might not be a complete data structure of what our Pokemon model should look like, but use what we do have. and update that Pokemon. And then we check here if that's valid. The data that was added to our new Pokemon, is it valid or not? And if it is, we also want to check if the list of move IDs is not none. If it's not none, where earlier I had it like this, is list of move IDs. It didn't like that. I had to specifically say is not none. If it's not none, that means there are some move IDs in there that we have to handle. So we update the moves. And then finally, we can update our new Pokemon and return the response. Now, let's talk about deleting. This is back to our URL path. Let's go ahead and move this out of the way. It's very cluttery. Where would I delete a Pokemon from? Which URL path should handle this?
Should be
Yeah,
the single, wouldn't it?
That's what I was gonna say.
It should be the single, correct? Right? We should be able to grab a Pokemon by its ID and our name, and then just remove it from existence. Right? So we're going to use this one within the single Pokemon view and add a delete method. So we can come here. We are currently within single Pokemon class. At the very bottom, I'm going to create a new method, and this is going to be delete. This method is going to take in self, and it should say request, then we'll get an issue. And then also, because we're using the path that's taken in a single Pokemon, like an ID or a name, we need to take in that Pokemon name. Let me see what I called it in my URLs. I call it single Pokemon. So it's looking for that argument specifically. Single Pokemon. Now, within here, I'm going to grab that Pokemon by saying single Pokemon. Yeah, we can do single Pokemon is equal to Pokemon dot object dot get, or we can use the get Pokemon helper function we created. So we can say self dot get Pokemon. This takes in what parameters? It takes in the single Pokemon value that's coming from the URL path. And this will return to me a Pokemon object, the one that we are looking for. Who can take a wild guess of how we delete this Pokemon?
Single Pokemon dot delete.
Single Pokemon dot delete. And then all we have to say is return response, give a status of HTTP 204 no content. Let's check that out. Totaled out, you've done your best, but it's time to put you to sleep. And we can delete this because we're not using the body. We are only using the Pokemon name within the URL path. We send this and we get a 204 no contents. He is no longer present. Just to verify, we can come here, we query our database, and we see here he is no longer present. He is bye-bye. Do I have any questions about the delete method in our view? Roger, what happens if we don't find it? Well, the get method for get Pokemon, it has the get object or 404. All right, so I don't have to return anything else because it will return to me a 404, right? But if it doesn't return a 404, that means it does exist, and all I need to return is 204 no content. Do I have any questions? How do I handle this on my client? Well, I will be listening for that status, right? I'll grab the status on my client of what type of response did I get. Was it a 404 or was it a 204? If it was 204 on my client side, I know that it was deleted, and I can make some kind of like, screen that says Pokemon successfully deleted on my front end. Right? That's how that would work. Do I have any questions before I move on to testing? Okay. Right on. Let's go ahead and let's start running this. I have some tests. I'll just do it. Python manage.py test test. And you remember yesterday? Oh man, again. I literally just fixed these before I started class. So what happened, what I thought I fixed was that if you notice here, when it's returning the Pokemon, it's doing what it should be doing. My stuff works. It's just returning it in the wrong order. It doesn't like the order that it's there, right? So tests are very specific. It has to be exactly what the answer is. Why does this differ? Who can take a guess? What did I do within this class that my tests probably aren't tracking? The test is get all Pokemon or get a Pokemon.
You're talking about the dunder all that you put in your serializer?
No. Yeah, that is one reason. Good catch, one. I also added other Pokemon. Right? Remember we had to create an answers.py and it's checking all the Pokemon? Well, this doesn't match what it's doing now, right? Because we have additional Pokemon. So, right? But it also doesn't match because of the dunder all, right? I'm returning all the fields where originally it was only tracking 5 different fields. So 2 reasons why it's failing now, unfortunately. But that's beyond the point. Let's go ahead and move forward from that. Let's talk about today's test. The first test we are going to do is going to be our put method. So that is going to be within our views. We have get all Pokemon, get a Pokemon. We did the noun project. This one was giving me an error yesterday, if you guys recall. The issue with why it was giving me an error was because the mock response, it didn't match what it was actually returning. I was going by the curriculum, but I had to go in here and actually edit it. The curriculum wasn't accurate with how the built. Specific fields that we had to check against. So that was the only thing that was happening here. But within our test views, let's do it right here below the get a Pokemon. We are going to create a new test, and this is going to be called test 003 updates Pokemon data, and it takes in self. So we have to update the Pokemon, and what we have to do, let me put up my notes. I don't know everything from the top of my head. This is a little bit different than how I did it, but let's try it out. I'm going to have to create a Pokemon, right? So this is supposed to update a Pokemon data. I need to mimic the data that's going to be given to this test, right? So what I need to do is create the data. Who can talk me through how that would probably look like? Not a trick question. Right, we're trying to mimic the data that we get from the body to use within here. We should probably have something like level. And it is 22. And then we will have captured is true. I don't know, we have to add quotation marks in here since it's a test, but I'll do it for now and then I'll remove it if I do get an issue. And description, and we can say a fire type Pokemon with fire on his tail. This will be our fire Pokemon. Right. We are trying to update. I'm assuming you can probably already guess what we're trying to update here. This is gonna mimic the data that's coming from the body of a request. And then we are gonna also do response. This will mimic the actual call. And we will do cell.client.put. Right. It's still the same, right? What do we use to mimic that API call? Right, that request. We use the client. Right, this is mimicking our front end. That client is making a GET request. But here, because we're updating, we have to mimic a PUT request. We need to give it a URL path, which is going to use, and we can do that by using the reverse method. That's going to create a URL path for us. It's going to reference the view that it should be creating a URL path for. And this view should be single Pokemon because we're updating a single Pokemon. So we can do single Pokemon. And then it's going to take some arguments, right? The arguments here is supposed to mimic the argument that the URL path will have, right? If it's supposed to update a single Pokemon, how does our URL path look like? Any guesses? Just like this. This will mimic that URL path, but it also needs to know what arguments will the URL path have. It should have Charmander. And then last but not least, the next argument will give a reverse, which we have not seen, is passing in our body, request body. Next, we'll do response body is equal to JSON.loads, response.content. And before we do anything else, let's see what this looks like. We can run our tests. It ran 2 tests. It failed the 2 from earlier. That's fine. Get a Pokemon, get all Pokemon. But here we are printing out, this is the actual print statement from test 3. We are printing out response content, right? So what's happening is the response on line 42, it uses the self.client to mimic a client, right? That client is putting in a put request, and the request that's happening has the URL path of API v1 Pokemon. Roger, how does it know what path that is? It uses a name that was assigned to it within our URLs, right? This is the URL path. Remember, we gave it a name to reference it during our tests. So we pass in that name and it's able to kind of like reverse engineer the path, right? It references this and it grabs the path. It sees a path and it knows that it's supposed to have an argument, right? So we have to pass that in so we don't get an error because it's expecting an argument. So we pass in the argument of Charmander. And then we have to give it a body to mimic that put request where it has the body data, right? This is going to return that response to us, but we need to convert it into a JSON format. So we do response body is equal to JSON.loads. Oh, my bad. And I'm printing it out to see what actually happened when this ran. The next step is actually checking it with what the right answer should be. So I'm going to go to my Thunder clients and I'm going to put in this put request. And we should be able to grab Charmander. And let's copy the data from our test views. Oh, Jesus Christ, dude. Okay. I don't think it'll actually be an issue. All right. And you see this work. My server is not running. Detail not found. Do I not have Charmander in here? Oh, my bad. I do not have Charmander. My apologies. Let's go ahead and create this bad boy. We can do a post to our endpoints. And then let's do name is Charmander. And it's level 13. Put this post request. Why do you hate me? Invalid control character. Oh my god. There you go. There we go. Sorry, it's very finicky. Thunder client is very finicky. I do apologize. So Charmander exists. Let's go ahead and copy this data. Let's just get rid of this. I'm not going to reformat it. It should work. This field is required. It's a post request. I'm putting a put request. Put not allowed. Because I need to give it Charmander. There we go. Little debugging here. Live action. You guys gonna run into the same problems. I guarantee it, or more. Well, here we go. This is what's supposed to be returned to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this. And let's go to our answers.py. And I am going to create a new answer. We'll call it updated Pokemon is equal to. Add a data in here. I don't know if it's gonna get an issue because this is like this. Well, let's try to run it. We'll run with that. Let's go back to our test views. And now we actually have to do something to compare it to, right? We have it so far, but we have to assert it, right? So what we're gonna say is self.assert equal, and then we'll pass in our updated Pokemon, which we do not have in here. So let's go ahead and import the answer. Updated Pokemon, I think is what we called it. Yep. And then what do we want to assert it against? The response body. And let's give this bad boy a run. We can go ahead and do test. Name true is not defined. I knew it was going to do that. Let's go ahead and do that again.
Do you have to capitalize the T? Because in Python.
That is a good question, but no, it's taking it. It's literally comparing if it's exactly what it should be. I can't change any data. If that's how it's being formatted to me, that's exactly how I have to give it. But I see what you make a very good question. I don't think so. Because we are grabbing this from the front end. This is being sent from the front end, and JavaScript doesn't do capital T's. So they should be coming to us like this. Does that make sense? So we should be able to do like this actually. So we actually lowercase it on this side. I get an issue here. I get unsupported media type. Right, and that's because it expects a certain input here. Now that we start working with the body, it needs a type of media that it's supposed to reference. So we'll give it the command of, I believe it's content type. Do I add it? No, I don't add it here. I want to say I add it here. Content type. How do I spell this? Yeah, content underscore type. I believe it goes here. And we give it application /JSON. And you guys kind of saw this when I was putting that put request on the server. There's that box that opened up. There's a content type field, right? And it expects that for the put request. So let's try it again. And it is working now. I failed to, unfortunately, get a Pokemon. I'm looking for update Pokemon data. So I did fail the update Pokemon data. It got an unexpected key argument, which is content type. Where do I put this bad boy? Let me check the curriculum. This is what I kept trying to do it from the top of my head. Okay, my apologies. It's somewhere else that it goes. It's gonna go in here. Content type. Application JSON. I do apologize for that, guys. I am not a computer, so I do forget stuff. I am human. Let's run this. And it still hates me. What is it failing this time? We have update Pokemon data. I think it's gonna have to do with the assertion. It doesn't match the data type. Detail not found. So it's saying that there's something on the updated Pokemon on the answers.
In the curriculum, it doesn't use the JSON.loads. At least I didn't see it anywhere in there.
I think it does take it because it has to be JSON. I'm gonna take your word for it, James. Let's try it out. Because it's saying that the data does not match.
Then make sure you update it so it's response instead of response body.
Absolutely. Response. Thank you for that, Tristan. And update Pokemon data, it's still fiddling. It's saying that it does not match. Yeah, I think we have to do the data, my friend. It doesn't show it on the curriculum, but notice that it doesn't know what it is. Right? Let's go ahead and do that again. Like now it's not even showing me any kind of formatted data. Thank you for that though. There's something that's missing. Detail not found. I mean, actually, the response body is still not liking it. What do you not like from this? We don't have response content to assert, so instead we'll assert the HTTP status code. Oh, okay, I see. If we undo this and we do response, and all we want to check is the status code, response.status code, and compare it to 204. 404 does not equal 204. It's saying that one of these, this is returning a 404. That means this view is not working like it should be. There's something wrong with this. Okay. I'll come back to this test, guys, and figure out what's going on with this. So we don't lose time. I only got 20 more minutes. The views is already very finicky. We'll come back to this one. I'm not sure why this is returning a 404. I was trying to get away from making the Pokemon here and just adding the request body. But I'll come back to it and then we can debug it later at a different time. But this should be working. Is it because it's missing list of moves, maybe? No, it shouldn't. Spot, we have level, capture, description. We have the response, self.clients, put requests, we do reverse, give it the location of it, which is single Pokemon. In my URLs, Pokemon app, yeah, it's single Pokemon. Everything's good so far. The arguments are within the reverse function. Charmander.
I got a quick
Could it-
question.
Could it be
Yes.
because you didn't create the instance?
What do you mean the instance?
Ooh.
Could you say that again, James?
Could it be because you didn't create an instance to check it against? Up above your request body on line 36?
No, I don't think so. I see that that's how the curriculum is doing it, and I'm a little confused on why they did that way. This should work. If I'm being honest with you. They work when I did it before. I'll tell you that right now.
I got a quick question for the Pokemon on the model. Is captured, do we have that as a string or a Boolean?
It is a Boolean.
So would captured be a Boolean instead of a string of true? So it'd actually be just capital true, like capital T, without the string in it.
I
And
do not believe so.
capital T.
Let's try. Let's try. The formatting can get very finicky.
Okay, it's just missing the same exact thing. It looks like.
Yeah, this is a client that is actually not returning anything. Right. It's supposed to mimic the actual client and do what it should be doing. We pass in the request body, but it was printing out
Actually
earlier.
comparing that detail there that you have, because it looks like it's sending back detail and then the actual Pokemon.
Right.
You're like cutting out really bad.
Stand by. Can you hear me?
Yeah. What'd you say?
Yeah, so this line right here of assertion error, that is returning from line 45. It's grabbing the updated Pokemon that we created in the answers. So it's using this, right? And you can kind of see here already. And it's comparing it to the response body. Well, we saw what response body is. Let's go ahead and print that out. Print response body. Run it again. And then the response body, where are you being printed out, my friend? Right here. Before it actually gives me the fail. It shows me that it's grabbing. Okay, I see. It's grabbing me Pikachu and Thunder Shock. You see that? It's grabbing me something that should not be grabbing me. And I don't understand where Pikachu is coming from. Or am I printing out from somewhere else? No, I don't think so. Let's do actually response body and hello. Where are you being printed out, my friend? Get a Pokemon. Fail. Control F. Hello. Okay, here we go. Detail not found. This is not returning something. Right. This something right here that we are not getting. Response status code 44. There is something wrong here on my response. There's something wrong with the client that is not working, which we'll debug later. All right. But everything else should be fine. For some reason, this is actually not putting in the reverse. I don't know if I'm like failing to print something out or did I mess up the formats. I don't believe I messed up the formats. I see this is going to here. It takes request body. Let me double check my notes. Reverse single Pokemon, yeah, arguments, we have it. It's Charizard. I don't think it's gonna. No, there's no way it's finicky about this. Yeah, there's something wrong with this method here that's not liking, and it's just completely fading. Right, it's returning to me detail not found, and it shouldn't be doing that. We will talk about this at a later time. We can go ahead and move forward with the next test. See if we can do that one a little bit different. To finish off the class, we'll go to our test for deleting a Pokemon. So we have update Pokemon data. Let's just go ahead and move forward. We'll say define test 004 create. We'll create a Pokemon. So that was updating it. We can create one here. We are going to create a new Pokemon here. And this is going to be our Geodude. Our Geodude is what we're going to use for actually creating this bad boy. It's going to take what Fields is taking. We'll give him name of Geodude. Name Geodude. We can add this directly into the reverse, but it's going to become a very long line. You will have level of 22. I wonder if it was maybe this. I didn't like the formatting of this as well. We'll come back to it in a bit. We will say description and Geodude is a rock type Pokemon. And it's a little annoying because test, if you mess up one small thing, the entire thing will break. That's why test-driven development is such a pain. We'll say captured equals true. And then now that we have our new Pokemon, let's go ahead and do our response. And it's going to be cell.client. If we're creating it, what type of method is this? post, right? And then we use the reverse method to use our URL path. And we are creating a new Pokemon. What path do we use for our creating Pokemon? Do you guys remember?
The single Pokemon.
Yeah, the single Pokemon. So for our URLs.py, it's called, oh, it is not single Pokemon. We're creating one, Owen. Right? We are creating one, and we did that in our all Pokemon view. Right? So it's gonna be the Pokemon / and that's it. Good try though, good try. So it should be all Pokemon. And then afterwards, we are going to give it arguments. And these arguments is going to be it should take body actually. It doesn't take an argument. It should be is it body, request body? We're just passing that in. New Pokemon. Yeah, it should be something like this. We're taking the new Pokemon, and then it should take, I believe, content type. Content type is equal to application /JSON. It'll go to our path for Pokemon. It has the data and the content type. Is everyone still with me? We could add the body directly in here, but it's just easier to do it in this manner, so we don't have all this all within one line. We add the content type, and then we can say with self.subtest. We're going to test two things. The first one is going to be our assertion for our status. We say equal. We say response.status code. And this should be a 201 because we are creating stuff. Or was it 204? Let me see. Where did I use?
204 is delete.
204 is no content. We are adding a new Pokemon. 201. It was 201. Okay. We're doing 201. So we know that the view is set up to actually return 201, so we can test that. And then the last one will be assert true. And Geodude is going to equal to response.data.get. And I think I might get an error here because he's not in the database. If I'm being honest with you guys, we can go ahead and grab this real quick. Put this in here in a post. Remove this. Add it in here. Run the server. Let's create it. Bad line. I hate working with Thunder Client. I liked it at first. I'm not a big fan anymore. We'll leave it like that. We can go ahead and copy. No, we should have it. It should be fine. He should be in there. Let's go ahead and run this now. Where's my views test? Okay. Let's see if this works. No. Test. I think this is good. We said create Pokemon. Oh, the Pokemon. Create Pokemon. Yeah, our create Pokemon worked just fine. There we go. At least one worked today. Lord. All right, so the create Pokemon was correct. I think this is not the same as, or completely the same as the response. There's two responses I see in here. I don't know what's the purpose for both responses. All this was put within one test. I did it a little bit different than the curriculum. All right, but here we can at least see how we can create a Pokemon We added the body here. I don't know what in the world is happening here. We will come back to this later. I will figure this out during lunch, but it's not that the method was wrong. It might differ a little bit from the curriculum, but it still works, right? We were able to create a makeshift body here. We added to a response from the client. So we did self.client. We put in that post request. We created that path using reverse. We passed in the body and then the content type. Afterwards, we check the status code and we assert true to ensure that it matches what it should be. Do I have any questions, guys, about testing? I do apologize for the last test. We will get to that one later. For deleting a Pokemon, that one is fairly simple. We can do test 005, delete Pokemon self, right? And the way that we would do that is we can utilize the test that we just created to create an instance of that Pokemon within here, right? Essentially, what we would do is self.test 004, create a Pokemon, or I think we call it create Pokemon. And then that test will run and it will create that instance of that Pokemon. And what we do is run response equals, we mock that delete request. We use reverse again to grab, I believe we use single Pokemon for the delete one. We pass in the arguments, which is supposed to be the argument passing the URL path, which should be Geodude. And then at the end, all we do is assert the instance of the Pokemon. We assert the instance of Pokemon's request that we get back. So it should be response.status code. And it should be a 204 for delete. Like,
I have a
see,
question, Roger, before you clear your terminal.
yes.
You said it passed, the create one passed. I'm just trying to see in your terminal, how do you see that it passed? 'Cause I'm looking at assertion error up there. So can you just kind of explain how,
Where are you
what are
looking
you
at? Because,
seeing? What are you seeing in your terminal that's telling you that the create
well,
test passed?
yeah. Well, for one, it's not failing, right? And if it would have failed, I would have seen it in here. Test 005 delete Pokemon would have shown up, whether it was an error or if it failed, right? But you also have these right here that tell you how many tests there are. It actually goes all the way down here, and the ones that pass are dots, right? So all these dots are successful tests. We failed a couple, and those are represented by F, and then we have the dots afterwards, right? So those are all like things that have passed and things that have failed. Does that make sense? I also don't see it in here, so that kind of gave me an idea that I'm assuming it passed. If there's something that I don't see here, please let me know. Did I miss something?
No, you're good.
Create Pokemon. I don't see it in here. I can only assume that we're good here. I have no other doubt from that. But yeah, thank you for asking that question. So we have here, we are asserting that we get a 204. Let's see if this works. We don't have it failing. So delete a Pokemon, right? 005 is not failing. Oh, this is just going back all the way up to all my other errors. But let me clear this out to get a better understanding of what's happening here. And let's run it again. Right. Update Pokemon data. That's still the one I have to debug during lunch. Right. Get a Pokemon. That's what we mentioned about the serializers being different and the fact that I changed the database. I added new Pokemon, right? And the serializers are now returning all the fields instead of the specific fields it's testing. So because I changed data, these are obviously going to fail. So we can ignore those. Those are easy fixes. Get all Pokemon, same concept. I changed the serializer fields that it returns, as well as the fact that we have new Pokemon in there. But the only one that's actually truly failing right now is the put request, which I will debug. Everything else is good to go. Right, so all the tests that we have done so far, the tests are perfectly written. It's just that I've changed data, right? The serializers are now different, so they're going to return different fields because I created, new other methods within my views, right? So I had to update my serializer, therefore nothing matches yet. So I have to go back, update that. We did the delete a Pokemon and create a Pokemon. These were successful. So we saw how to test our post requests. We saw how to test our delete requests. And then I owe you guys the put request of why that is giving us such a headache, right? But time is 12 o'clock. Today we talked about CRUD, creating, reading, updating, deleting, how to use our API views to add that. We also went through testing to update our views. Once again, I owe you the put one, figure out what that issue is, and I will let you know how I solved it. If I have no further questions from you guys are now good to go to lunch. I will see you guys back here at 1:30 for group work. I will open up the breakout rooms and I'll stay behind for a little bit if anyone has any other questions. If not, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now.